Madame, vous n'êtes pas seule. Je vous comprends et je vais vous aider.
What if the worst customer you ever served held the key to unlocking your wildest dreams? For Claire Bennett, a waitress in a bustling New York diner, a single sentence, spoken in a language she wasn't expected to know, irrevocably altered the course of her life. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of a chance act of kindness. A man who saw potential where others saw only a waitress, a cryptic note, a private jet ticket, and a challenge that could either break her or transform her into the person she was destined to be. The aroma of stale coffee and burnt bacon grease was the constant, pervasive perfume of Claire's existence. It clung to her hair, her inexpensive polyester uniform, and etched itself into the weary lines etched around her 26-year-old eyes. She worked at the Astor Diner on Manhattan's Upper East Side, an establishment that, much like its name, aspired to a grandeur it couldn't quite attain. The polished brass railings were perpetually smudged with fingerprints. The red vinyl booths were cracked and worn, resembling aged leather more than anything luxurious. It was a purgatory for aspiring artists, struggling actors, and in Claire's case, forgotten scholars. Each morning, she'd tie the frayed strings of her apron, a testament to countless shifts, and plaster on a smile that rarely reached her eyes. She was a proficient waitress, efficient, polite, and almost invisible. The ideal employee. No one poring over their Wall Street Journal or complaining about lukewarm soup ever suspected that Claire possessed the ability to dissect the semiotics of Renaissance art or engage in sophisticated debates on French existentialist philosophy. No one knew that just 4 years prior she had been a top student at the Sorbonne in Paris, living a life brimming with the vibrant hues of her dreams. Then came the devastating phone call. Her father's heart attack, the collapse of his construction business, and the crushing weight of unforeseen debt. Her dreams evaporated overnight. She returned home, trading the cobblestone streets of the Latin Quarter for the cracked pavement of a cramped apartment she shared with her friend, Jasmine Cooper. "Order up!" Frankie Morales, the cook, bellowed, his voice a gravelly roar that cut through the sizzle of the griddle. Claire collected the heavy plates, the heat warming her forearms. "Thanks, S," she replied, navigating the cramped diner with practiced ease, weaving between tables and busboys. Table 7 proved to be her particular nemesis that day. A man in a pinstripe suit, likely in his late 40s, who had already sent back his orange juice due to excessive pulp. Bradley Whitmore, as she learned, was desperately trying to impress his significantly younger date, meticulously scrutinizing his medium-rare steak. "Not medium, not rare," he insisted, snapping his fingers. "If it bleeds, I'm sending it back. If it's gray, I'm sending it back. Got it, sweetheart." Claire simply smiled, replying, "Perfectly clear, sir." Amidst the lunchtime chaos, her eyes briefly scanned the room. In a far corner booth, a man sat alone, strikingly different from the usual Astor Diner clientele. He wasn't engrossed in his phone or seeking attention. He simply observed. Dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater and charcoal trousers, he lacked any ostentatious display of wealth. Yet the impeccable tailoring and the quiet intensity in his gaze suggested a life far removed from the diner's everyday bustle. He nursed a single black coffee, and each time Claire passed, she felt his observant gaze upon her. It wasn't unsettling, merely analytical. She instinctively categorized him as a writer or perhaps a professor. He possessed an air of quiet contemplation. "2 more coffees for table 9, Jasmine Cooper whispered as they crossed paths near the kitchen. "And Whitmore is asking for you again. He says his water tastes too municipal." Claire sighed, rubbing her temple. Of course he does. I'll get the bottled water. It was just another Tuesday, a relentless cycle of pouring coffee, taking orders, and enduring the casual condescension of patrons who had never known the struggle of choosing between paying utility bills and buying groceries. She moved towards Whitmore's table, her tray of water bottles perfectly balanced, utterly unaware that this ordinary, soul-crushing Tuesday was on the verge of irrevocably altering her life. The man in the corner booth took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze following Claire, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't merely watching a waitress. He was waiting. The bell above the diner door chimed, announcing a new arrival. An elderly woman, appearing flustered and out of place, entered, clutching a large handbag, her eyes wide, scanning the chaotic room as if navigating a foreign jungle. Her attire was elegant, yet understated. A classic trench coat over a silk scarf, suggesting a tourist who had inadvertently strayed far from Madison Avenue. She approached the host stand where Tyler, a teenage employee, was struggling to manage the seating chart. "A table?" she asked, her English heavily accented and uncertain. "S'il vous plaît?" Tyler stared blankly. "A what table?" "For one." "S'il vous plaît?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Yeah, hold on," Tyler mumbled, eyes glued to his seating chart. The woman waited, her distress growing. She tried again, this time in rapid-fire French, explaining her predicament. She was lost, her phone battery was dead, and she was supposed to meet her tour group at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, mistakenly believing it to be the Guggenheim. Tyler merely shook his head. "Sorry, lady, I don't speak whatever that is. Spanish?" From his table, Bradley Whitmore let out a loud, theatrical sigh. Oh, for heaven's sake, let a man of culture handle this. He pushed back his chair, puffing out his chest as he approached the woman. "Bonjour, madame," he began, his accent a grotesque parody. I can help you. You, want a table?" The French woman appeared even more confused. Claire, delivering bread to a nearby table, felt a wave of second-hand embarrassment wash over her. Whitmore's butchering of the French language, transforming its lyrical beauty into a clumsy assault on the ears, was excruciating to witness. It wasn't just his poor French. It was his arrogance, his smug self-satisfaction in creating a spectacle of this lost woman's distress. It mirrored the same condescension he'd displayed towards Claire all afternoon. A long dormant part of her, the part that remembered strolling along Parisian boulevards and engaging in philosophical debates, finally snapped. She placed the bread on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached the elderly woman. The man in the corner booth, Alexander Sterling, leaned forward slightly, his coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Claire looked at the woman and smiled gently, then spoke. The voice that emerged wasn't the weary, flat tone of a New York waitress. It was the voice of another life. A voice as smooth and clear as a bell. "Madame," she began, her Parisian accent flawless and pure. "Pardonnez-moi, madame. Pardon the interruption. This man doesn't understand you. May I help you? You seem lost." The room fell silent. Whitmore's jaw dropped. His date stared at Claire in disbelief. Frankie Morales peeked out from the kitchen window. The French woman's face, however, lit up with profound relief. "Oh, mon Dieu," she exclaimed, hand flying to her chest. She began her story again, but this time, her words found a receptive ear. Claire listened patiently, offering reassurance. "Madame, s'il vous plaît," she said soothingly. "Don't you worry, madame. Everything will be all right." She turned to Tyler. "Tyler, can you seat this lady at table 12, please, and bring her a glass of water and a menu?" Then back to the woman. Please have a seat. Let me use my phone to call your tour guide. What is the name of the company? While the woman, Madame Dubois, searched for the tour company's brochure, Claire turned to Bradley Whitmore. His face was a mottled shade of red, a mixture of fury and humiliation. "If you'll excuse me, sir," Claire said, her voice reverting to its polite professional tone. "I'll get you that bottled water now." She didn't wait for a response, leaving him deflated. She retrieved her phone, made a quick call, and resolved Madame Dubois's predicament. The tour bus would wait for another hour. She gave the woman clear directions to a nearby taxi stand, written on a napkin. Madame Dubois was effusive in her gratitude, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into Claire's hand, which Claire gently refused. "De rien, madame. It's my pleasure. Have a safe trip." As Madame Dubois left, a sense of quiet satisfaction washed over Claire. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. She'd almost forgotten what that felt like. She went to clear Whitmore's table, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he'd left a paltry $1 tip on a $100 bill. She wasn't surprised. What did surprise her was that the man in the corner booth was also rising to leave. He caught her eye as he slipped on a tailored navy blue coat, giving her a subtle nod, a look of profound appraisal in his eyes. He left a crisp $100 bill on his table for a $3 coffee and exited without a word. Claire pocketed the generous tip, a small thrill of victory coursing through her. She thought that was the end of it. A brief, satisfying act of rebellion in an otherwise monotonous existence. She had no idea it was merely the beginning. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine. The frantic energy of the lunch rush subsided, replaced by the quiet hum of the late afternoon. Claire refilled salt shakers, wiped down sticky ketchup bottles, and tried to ignore Bradley Whitmore's sneer and the lingering weight of the quiet man's gaze. She was simply Claire, the waitress. The flicker of the Sorbonne student, she thought, had been just that, a flicker. When her shift ended at 5:00 p.m., she felt the familiar ache in her feet and the deeper ache in her soul. She slung her worn messenger bag over her shoulder and headed for the back exit. "Hey, Beaumont!" She turned. It was Frankie Morales, wiping his hands on his greasy apron, holding something, a sleek black envelope. "The quiet guy, the one in the corner booth. He came back a few minutes ago, said he forgot to give this to you. Told me to make sure you got it personally." Claire frowned. Taking the envelope, it was made of thick, expensive cardstock, unlike anything she'd ever encountered. There was no name, no address, just a simple, elegant silver seal. The stylized wings of what appeared to be a falcon. "Weird, right?" "Looked like a spy or something," Frankie Morales grunted. "Anyway, see you tomorrow." Claire murmured her thanks and slipped out into the alley. The cool evening air felt refreshing against her flushed skin. Leaning against a brick wall under a dim security light, she broke the seal. Her fingers trembled slightly. Inside were 2 items. The first was a business card, as thick and black as the envelope itself. The silver falcon crest was embossed at the top. Below it, in minimalist silver lettering, were a name and a title: Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Innovations. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Sterling Innovations wasn't just a tech company. It was a global titan, a behemoth in aerospace logistics and cutting-edge AI. Alexander Sterling was a legend, a reclusive genius who had built an empire from scratch, a multi-billionaire, famously private and rarely photographed. That was the quiet man from the diner. It seemed impossible. The second item made her heart stop altogether. a private jet reservation confirmation, a Gulfstream G650 scheduled to depart from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey the following day at noon. The destination, Le Bourget Airport, Paris. The passenger's name, Claire Bennett. Tucked into the fold of the ticket was a small handwritten note on matching black stationery. The handwriting was sharp and decisive, a bold, forward-slanting script in silver ink. Miss Beaumont, the note read, talent should never be wasted on serving mediocrity. A voice like yours belongs in Paris, not in a diner arguing over bottled water. A car will be waiting for you at your address tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Your seat will be waiting. This is not a request. It's an opportunity. Claire read the note repeatedly, her mind reeling. The alley seemed to tilt. The city sounds faded into a dull roar. This had to be a joke, an elaborate, cruel prank. Perhaps Whitmore had orchestrated it to further mock her. But how would he know her address? And how could he afford a private jet to Paris? She stumbled home in a daze, the black envelope clutched in her hand like a talisman. When she burst into her apartment, Jasmine Cooper was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a reality TV show blaring in the background. "Whoa, you look like you've seen a ghost," Jasmine Cooper said, looking up. Claire didn't speak. She simply laid the contents of the envelope on the coffee table. Jasmine Cooper picked up the card. "Sterling Innovations. Isn't that—" Her eyes widened. She read the note, then looked at the ticket. She looked back at Claire, her mouth agape. "What is this?" "I don't know," Claire whispered, sinking onto the couch. "It's insane. He was there at the diner. The guy I told you about who left the $100 tip." Jasmine Cooper's initial shock morphed into deep suspicion. "Okay, hold on. A strange billionaire leaves you a private jet ticket to Paris, Claire. This is every red flag in the book. This is how horror movies start. Human trafficking, a weird cult, some kind of creepy pretty woman fantasy. You cannot be serious." I know, Claire said, running a hand through her hair. "It's crazy. But the note, talent should never be wasted." He saw. He heard. He heard you speak French. Jasmine Cooper stood up and paced the small living room. "That's it. For all you know, this guy has some bizarre fetish." "Claire, you don't know anything about him." "He's Alexander Sterling," Claire said quietly. "He's one of the most famous businessmen in the world. He's not some random creep." "Rich people can be the biggest creeps of all," Jasmine Cooper shot back. "And how did he get your address? That's what I want to know." "That's not just observant. That's investigative. It's stalker-level stuff." The question hung heavy and unnerving. How did he know where she lived? Claire's mind raced. He must have had someone follow her or run her name through a database. The ease with which he'd pierced the veil of her anonymity was terrifying. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A wild, dangerous hope. "Paris," she whispered. The word itself was a physical ache in her chest. The ticket wasn't just paper. It was a doorway back to the life that had been stolen from her. It was a chance. It was everything. "What if it's real?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if it's just an opportunity? Like he said." "And what if it's a trap?" Jasmine Cooper retorted, arms crossed. "You throw away your job, your life here, on the whim of a man you met for 5 seconds, for a cryptic note. Be realistic." Claire looked around her cramped apartment, at the peeling paint, the overdue bills. She thought of her grease-stained uniform hanging by the door. This was her reality, safe, predictable, and slowly suffocating her. The note said, This is not a request. It felt like a command, but also a challenge. A challenge to be more than what she had become. The fear was real. Jasmine Cooper's warnings were logical. But the pull of Paris, the intoxicating possibility of escape, was stronger. "I think I have to go," Claire said, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue. "I have to know." The next morning was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. Claire called the diner and quit, her voice shaking as she left a message for Mr. Davies, her manager. She imagined his annoyance, his casual dismissal of her as just another flaky waitress. The thought, which would have bothered her yesterday, felt strangely liberating today. Packing was a surreal experience. What does one pack for a clandestine trip to Paris offered by a reclusive billionaire? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and a single black dress she'd owned for 5 years. She stuffed them into her old suitcase, feeling foolish and hopelessly out of her depth. Jasmine Cooper watched her, worry etched on her face. "I ran a background check on him, or tried to. He's a ghost. No scandals, no tabloid fodder, just business articles and philanthropy announcements. He's either a saint or very, very good at hiding things." "Maybe he's just private," Claire said, trying to convince herself as much as Jasmine Cooper. "Private people don't summon waitresses to Paris with anonymous notes," Jasmine Cooper shot back. "I'm serious, Claire. I've put a tracking app on your phone. Don't you dare turn it off. And I want you to check in with me every 3 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the embassy, the FBI, the CIA. I swear to God." Claire hugged her friend tightly, grateful for her fierce loyalty. "I'll be careful, I promise." At precisely 10:00 a.m., a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan, so silent it seemed to materialize out of thin air, pulled up to their apartment building. A chauffeur in a crisp black suit stepped out and opened the rear door. He didn't ask for her name. He simply nodded and said, "Miss Beaumont, we are ready when you are." The ride to Teterboro Airport was silent and smooth. Claire stared out the tinted windows, feeling detached, as if watching a movie of someone else's life. They didn't go to the main terminal, but to a private executive hangar. There, gleaming on the tarmac, was the Gulfstream G650, a vision of power and grace, larger and more imposing than she'd ever imagined. A flight attendant, with a warm smile, greeted her at the steps. "Welcome aboard, Miss Beaumont. Mr. Sterling has arranged everything for your comfort. May I take your bag?" The jet's interior was understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished mahogany wood, and subtle silver accents echoing the Falcon crest. It was more like a flying luxury apartment than an airplane. She was the only passenger. As the jet taxied down the runway, Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The point of no return. The engines roared, and the plane surged forward, pressing her back into her plush seat. Within moments, they were airborne, climbing steeply into the clouds. Below her, New York City shrank. The diner, her apartment, her old life, all vanishing into a haze. She was untethered, suspended between the world she knew and a terrifyingly unknown future. The flight attendant served her a lunch far superior to anything she'd ever served at the Astor Diner. Poached salmon, asparagus with hollandaise, and champagne that fizzed like liquid stars on her tongue. It all felt like a dream. She half expected to wake up to her alarm clock. But 7 hours later, the dream continued. As the jet began its descent, the lights of Paris emerged from the darkness below. A glittering carpet of gold and silver. The Eiffel Tower, lit up in its nightly spectacle, pierced the sky like a diamond needle. A lump formed in Claire's throat. She was back. After 4 years of yearning, she was finally home. They landed at Le Bourget, the private airport north of the city. There were no customs lines, no baggage claim chaos. She was escorted directly to another waiting car, another silent chauffeur. They drove through the streets of Paris, past familiar landmarks that tugged at her heart. The Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées. It was all as beautiful as she remembered. The car, however, didn't stop at a hotel. It pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates, opening onto a private, tree-lined cobblestone drive. At the end stood a magnificent hotel particulier, a grand private Parisian mansion in the 16th arrondissement, a palace of limestone and slate, its windows glowing warmly in the night. The chauffeur opened her door. "Welcome to Mr. Sterling's Parisian residence, Miss Beaumont." Her legs felt weak as she walked up the stone steps. The massive oak door swung open before she could touch it. Standing in the grand, marble-floored foyer was Alexander Sterling. He was dressed as he had been in the diner, a simple dark sweater and trousers. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "Welcome to Paris. I trust your flight was comfortable."
Yes, thank you,"
she stammered, feeling small and out of place in the cavernous hall with its soaring ceilings and priceless-looking art. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand any of this." "I know," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Clarity is the purpose of your visit, but first, you must be exhausted. My housekeeper will show you to your room. We can talk in the morning." He gestured, and a woman in a gray uniform appeared. As Claire followed her up a sweeping staircase, she glanced back. Alexander Sterling was watching her with the same unreadable, analytical expression he'd had in the diner. He hadn't explained anything. The mystery, she realized, was only deepening. This wasn't a gift. It was a prelude. Claire awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sleeping on sheets with a thread count higher than her monthly rent. Sunlight streamed through tall French windows, illuminating a bedroom larger than her entire New York apartment. It was exquisitely decorated in shades of cream and soft gray, with a small marble fireplace and a private balcony overlooking a manicured garden. A fresh kvass and a cup of coffee awaited her on a small table. The beautiful cage of her surroundings did little to alleviate her profound confusion. After donning her only decent black dress, a garment that now felt utterly inadequate, she descended the stairs. She found Alexander Sterling in a vast, book-lined study, poring over documents displayed on a sleek, transparent tablet. He looked up as she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather armchairs positioned opposite his expansive desk. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice firmer than she anticipated. "I appreciate the flight and accommodations, but I need to know why I'm here. This is unusual, to say the least. Quite direct." "I appreciate your directness," he said, setting his tablet aside and giving her his undivided attention. "You are here, Miss Beaumont, because I require a very specific skill set. A skill set I believe you possess, despite your current employment." Before he could elaborate, the study doors swung open. A woman entered, her heels clicking decisively on the polished parquet floor. Tall, impossibly chic, she exuded an aura of intimidating authority. She was impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored Christian Dior suit, her dark hair pulled back severely, gleaming under the light. Her piercing gray eyes, identical to Alexander's, swept over Claire with a cool, dismissive glance. "Alexander, you're late for the Lefebvre preliminary," she stated, her voice crisp and accented, a blend of British boarding school formality and American corporate legal precision. She paused, her gaze returning to Claire, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Is this her?" Alexander's face remained impassive. "Claire Bennett, this is my sister, Isabel Sterling. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Innovations. Isabel, this is Miss Beaumont." Isabel offered a smile that was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "A pleasure, though I confess I don't quite understand the purpose of this experiment, Alexander." She turned her attention back to Claire. "My brother has a penchant for seeing potential in the most unlikely places. He seems to think that because you can speak French, you can solve a multi-billion-dollar problem for us." Claire's head swam. Our multi-billion-dollar problem? What did they think she was? Alexander finally offered an explanation. Sterling Innovations was in the final stages of acquiring a company, a French company, Maison Lefebvre. Claire recognized the name. Everyone did. Maison Lefebvre was a legendary Parisian luxury house established in the 18th century. They were renowned for their bespoke leather goods and exquisitely crafted perfumes, a bastion of old-world craftsmanship and French heritage. "Lefebvre is family-owned," Alexander continued. "It has been for 8 generations, and the current matriarch, Geneviève Lefebvre, is vehemently resistant to the acquisition. She's a staunch traditionalist. She believes an American tech company like ours would irrevocably damage her family's legacy. We've deployed teams of the world's best lawyers and negotiators, and they've all failed. They don't speak her language, and I don't mean French. They don't speak the language of cultural nuance, of respect for tradition," Isabel interjected, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Geneviève Lefebvre slammed the door on our last M&A head because he wore white sneakers to a meeting." Claire was beginning to understand. "You need a translator." "No," Alexander said, leaning forward. "We have hundreds of translators. I need more than that. I need a bridge. I need someone who understands the subtleties of French culture, who can demonstrate respect for their heritage, but who also understands the directness and ambition of the American business mindset. Someone who can navigate both worlds seamlessly." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "In the diner, I didn't just see a waitress speaking French. I saw a woman of intelligence and grace handle a difficult, arrogant man with poise. Then I saw her treat a lost, frightened woman with compassion and empathy, using flawless, colloquial French. Not to show off, but to genuinely connect and help. That combination, poise under pressure, cultural fluency, and genuine empathy, is rarer than you can imagine. It cannot be taught in a business school." Isabel let out a quiet, impatient sigh. "It's a romantic notion, Alexander, a lovely story. But this is a $2.7 billion acquisition, not a social experiment. Ms. Beaumont has no corporate experience, no background in finance or law. She served pie yesterday. The insult felt like a physical blow, but Claire held her ground, refusing to let this woman diminish her. "And what is it you do exactly when you're not a waitress?" Isabel pressed, her eyes narrowing. "What hidden talents did my brother unearth with his little private investigation?" The question confirmed Claire's fears. He had investigated her. "I was a student," Claire said, her voice steady. "At the Sorbonne, I studied art history and French cultural studies. I had to leave before completing my degree due to a family emergency. Alexander nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Isabel, however, remained unimpressed. "So, you're a college dropout," she stated flatly. "My sister lacks a certain subtlety," Alexander said, shooting a warning look at Isabel. "Here is the situation, Miss Beaumont. This is not a vacation. It is, for all intents and purposes, a job interview. The most unorthodox job interview of your life. I want you to be part of the team meeting with Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. I don't want you to negotiate finances. I want you to listen, to observe, to build a bridge where we have only found walls." "And if I succeed?" Claire asked. "If you help us secure this deal," Alexander said, "I will create a position for you at this company. Director of Cultural Integration for our European acquisitions. You will have a new life, a salary that will resolve any family debt you might have, and a career that utilizes your actual talents. I will also fund the completion of your degree, should you still wish for it." It was an offer beyond comprehension, a lifeline not just to solvency, but to a life she thought was lost forever. "And if you fail," Isabel interjected before Alexander could continue. "If you fail, Miss Beaumont, a car will take you back to your hotel, and you will be on the next flight back to New York. You can have your old job back at the diner. We will, of course, compensate you for your time." Her tone made it clear that failure was the only outcome she anticipated. The weight of their expectations, the sheer surreal nature of the situation, pressed down on Claire. This was insane. They were asking her to step into a corporate shark tank armed with nothing but a half-finished arts degree and her fluency in French. It was an impossible task. But then she thought of the diner, the grease, the condescension, the slow grinding death of her spirit. Failure here meant returning to that. Success meant everything. She looked from Isabel's cold, challenging stare to Alexander's quiet, expectant one. She took a deep breath. "When is the meeting?" she asked. The next 2 days were a brutal, high-speed crash course in the world of corporate acquisitions. Claire was given an office in Sterling Innovation's Parisian headquarters on the Place Vendôme, a space with a view probably worth more than she had earned in her entire life. She was buried under an avalanche of files, financial reports, market analyses, legal documents, and most importantly, a thick dossier on Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. She devoured every page. She learned that Geneviève was 78 years old, a widow, and had run the company with an iron fist for 40 years. She was a legend in the fashion world, a purist who despised the modern trends of fast fashion and influencer marketing. The dossier was filled with accounts of other companies' failed attempts to acquire Maison Lefebvre. Geneviève had dismissed them all as vulgar merchants who wouldn't know a Birkin bag from a bucket. Isabel made her disdain for the entire situation abundantly clear. She would periodically enter Claire's office, quizzing her on obscure financial data and highlighting her lack of experience. "Do you even know what EBIT means, Miss Beaumont?" she'd ask, a smug look plastered on her face. "No," Claire admitted honestly. "But I know that Madame Lefebvre's favorite artist is Jean-Honoré Fragonard. That she believes the soul of her company resides in the specific stitching technique developed by her great-grandfather, and that she sees this deal not as a financial transaction, but as the potential obliteration of her family's legacy. Perhaps that is more important than earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization." The response left Isabel momentarily speechless, which gave Claire a small surge of confidence. She knew she couldn't compete on their turf. She couldn't speak the language of finance or law. But she could understand people. She could understand culture. That had to be her strength. The day of the meeting arrived, and Claire was a bundle of nerves. A stylist, summoned by Alexander, had provided her with a simple, elegant, navy blue dress by a discreet French designer and low heels. Understated, respectful, the stylist had advised. The meeting was to be held at the Lefebvre flagship store on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, a hallowed space that felt more like a museum than a shop. As their car pulled up, Claire could see a small army of lawyers and executives from Sterling Innovations waiting on the sidewalk, all looking tense. Alexander, Isabel, and Claire got out of the car. Alexander gave Claire a reassuring nod. "Remember, you are not here to speak for me. You are here to listen for me." Isabel simply sniffed. "Try not to spill anything." They entered the building. The air inside was silent and smelled of expensive leather and jasmine. They were led up a private elevator to a formal salon on the top floor. And there, sitting in a Louis XVI armchair, was Geneviève Lefebvre. She was a small, bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and perfectly coiffed silver hair. She was flanked by her two sons, both stern-faced men in their 50s. Introductions were made. Claire was introduced as part of their cultural liaison team. Genevieve's eyes lingered on her for a moment, a flicker of curiosity in their depths. The meeting began, and it was a disaster. Isabel, taking the lead, launched into a slick presentation filled with charts and projections about synergy, global market expansion, and shareholder value. She spoke with a cold, corporate precision that clearly grated on Madame Lefebvre. The matriarch listened, her face an unreadable mask. After 15 minutes, she held up a delicate, age-spotted hand. "Enough, Mademoiselle Sterling," she said, her voice soft but carrying immense authority. "I have heard these words before. They are empty numbers on a page. You talk of expanding my brand. You speak of it as if it is a chain of coffee shops. You do not understand what we do here. The soul." Isabel's professional smile tightened. "Madame Lefebvre, with all due respect, the soul of a company does not pay its employees or fund its growth in a competitive global market." It was the wrong thing to say. A chill descended upon the room. Madame Lefebvre's son, Antoine, spoke for the first time. "My mother finds your approach aggressive, mademoiselle." The meeting devolved from there. The two sides were speaking different languages, just as Alexander had predicted. The Sterling team talked about efficiency and profit. The Lefebvre family talked about heritage and art. Claire remained silent, watching and listening. She noticed the small details. She saw how Madame Lefebvre's hand rested on a particular leather-bound book on the table beside her. She noticed the painting on the wall behind her. Not a famous masterpiece, but a beautiful, intimate portrait of a woman in 18th century dress. It had the soft, romantic style of Fragonard, the artist mentioned in the dossier. As the meeting teetered on the brink of complete stalemate, Claire felt a desperate urge to intervene. This was her one shot. Alexander caught her eye, and she saw the question in his gaze. He gave her the slightest of nods. "Permission." "Madame Lefebvre," Claire said, her voice quiet but clear. The entire room turned to look at her. "Forgive my interruption." She stood up and walked not toward the negotiating table, but toward the painting on the wall. "This is a beautiful piece," she said, speaking in French. Her accent, so different from the formal textbook French of the translators, seemed to warm the air. "The brushwork is so delicate. It reminds me of Fragonard, but it's more intimate, less theatrical. Is it a family piece?" Geneviève Lefebvre's austere expression softened for the first time. She looked surprised and intrigued. You have a good eye, mademoiselle. That is a portrait of my great-great-great-grandmother, painted by one of Fragonard's lesser-known students. It is my most treasured possession. She is reading, Claire observed, looking closer. It was unusual for a woman to be painted reading in that era, unless she was a great intellectual. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was remarkable, Madame Lefebvre said, a note of pride in her voice. She is the one who convinced her husband, a simple saddle maker, to create the first handbag for Queen Marie Antoinette. She was the true founder of our house. Her vision. Isabelle was staring at Claire, her mouth slightly open, a look of utter disbelief on her face. The lawyers were shuffling their papers, confused by this sudden shift in conversation. Claire turned from the painting to face Madame Lefebvre. Mr. Sterling's company is built on technology and data. It is a world of numbers. But he understands that a legacy like yours is not built on numbers. It is built on vision. The vision of a woman like her. She gestured to the portrait. He does not want to erase that vision. He wants to give it a new voice, to share it with a world she could never have dreamed of. A company without a soul is just a machine. You are the soul of Maison Lefebvre. He is not here to buy a machine. He is here to protect a work of art. She had used the word art. She had connected the present to the past. She had shown that she saw not just a brand, but a story. Silence filled the room. Geneviève Lefebvre stared at Claire, her sharp eyes searching. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Alexander Sterling. Your father was a builder, was he not, Mr. Sterling? She asked. Alexander, who had remained silent, finally spoke. He was a carpenter. He taught me that the foundation is everything. Madame Lefebvre nodded slowly. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Perhaps we can have tea next week and you can leave your presentation, she said, gesturing to Isabelle's laptop. Just you and me. And, she added, her eyes finding Claire's, you will bring Mademoiselle Beaumont. The walk back to the car was surreal. The Sterling executives were buzzing with excitement, clapping Alexander on the back. For the first time in months, they had made progress. They had a second meeting. Isabelle was silent, her expression a thunderous mix of shock and resentment. As they got into the car, she finally turned to Claire. That was a lucky trick, she said, her voice low and sharp. A parlor game with an old painting. It wasn't a trick, Isabelle, Alexander said, his voice firm. He looked at Claire, and for the first time, she saw open admiration in his eyes. It was insight. She listened, something your team of experts failed to do. She found the foundation. Isabelle said nothing more for the rest of the ride, simply staring out the window, defeated. The tea with Madame Lefebvre the following week was a resounding success. Without the lawyers and presentations, the conversation flowed easily. Claire acted as the bridge, just as Alexander had hoped. She would translate not just their words, but their intent. When Alexander spoke of platforms and digital ecosystems, Claire would rephrase it to Madame Lefebvre as creating a digital atelier where the stories of the artisans could be shared with the world. They talked for hours, not about money, but about art history and legacy. By the end of the week, the deal was signed. Maison Lefebvre was now part of Sterling Innovations, but with contractual guarantees protecting its heritage, its French workshops, and with Geneviève Lefebvre herself appointed to a lifetime seat on the board as a brand guardian. The night the deal was finalized, Alexander hosted a small celebration at his mansion. Claire stood on the balcony of her room, the same one she had woken up in just over a week ago. looking out at the twinkling lights of Paris. She felt like a completely different person from the weary waitress who had stepped off that plane. Alexander came to stand beside her. For a few moments, they stood in comfortable silence. "I owe you a great deal, Claire," he said finally. "You gave me an opportunity," she replied. "That's more than anyone else ever has." "The offer I made is on the table," he said, turning to face her. "Director of Cultural Integration, a very generous salary, a housing allowance here in Paris, and a blank check for your education. It's yours. No interview required." This was it. The culmination of the impossible dream. A new life handed to her on a silver platter. But something had shifted in her over the past week. She had not just been acting as a bridge for him. She had been rebuilding a bridge to her own forgotten self. "Thank you," she said, her heart pounding. "It's an incredible offer. But I have a counter-proposal." Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I'm listening." "I don't want the job as a gift," she said. "And I don't want you to pay for my degree. I want you to invest in me. Not as an employee you discovered, but as a partner you value." She took a breath, summoning all the confidence she had gained. "I want to run the Maison Lefebvre integration, not as a director of a department, but as the project lead. Give me a budget and a team, and I want a performance-based contract. If I succeed in doubling its digital presence while maintaining brand integrities in 2 years, I get a stake in the subsidiary, a small one, but a real one. And I'll pay for my own degree with the salary you give me." She was asking for responsibility, not a reward. She was asking for a chance to build something herself, not just be a well-paid accessory to his empire. Alexander Sterling stared at her, his analytical gaze replaced by one of genuine surprise, which slowly morphed into a broad, brilliant smile. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face. "A college dropout waitress who served me coffee a week ago is now negotiating equity with me on a multi-billion-dollar deal," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He let out a soft laugh. "I knew my instincts were right about you, Claire Bennett. I just had no idea how right." He extended his hand. "You have a deal. Welcome to Sterling Innovations." Claire shook his hand, a current of electricity passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a contract. It was the closing of one chapter of her life and the explosive beginning of another. She was no longer a waitress who spoke French. She was a woman who had found her voice in more ways than one, and she was finally, truly home. Claire's story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that the person you are right now, in whatever job you're working, is not the final chapter. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills you think no one sees, they have immense value. It was a single moment of kindness and a sentence in French that changed Claire's life. But it was her courage to step onto that jet, her intelligence to see the real problem, and her confidence to demand her true worth that secured her future. What hidden talent do you have that the world just hasn't seen yet? What would you have done if you found that black envelope? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible journey. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their big break might be just one customer, one conversation, or one moment of courage away. Thank you for listening.